10 को गए हैं और बीच बीच में कहीं कहीं हम लोगों से वार्ता करते हुए गए हैं। पहुँचे हैं तो वहाँ से फिर कहें कि हम बाबूजी फिर जाएंगे या अपनी ड्यूटी पर खड़े होंगे तो फिर बात आपसे करेंगे। दोबारा हम लोगों से वार्ता नहीं हो पाया उनसे।
हम सरकार लड़के के बदले में अपने लड़के के बदले में कुछ नहीं मांगना चाहते, कुछ नहीं उनसे हमको चाहिए।
नहीं क्या चाहिए, मतलब कुछ नहीं चाहिए, लेकिन फिर भी कुछ कार्रवाई चाहते हैं कि नहीं पाकिस्तान पे इतनी बड़ी मतलब कार्रवाई की, इतना
पाकिस्तान से कार्रवाई करें तो करें तब न, कहाँ करते हैं लोग, कितने जवान तो शहीद हो चुके हैं।
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this special broadcast. 24 hours ago, close to 40 CRPF personnel were killed in one of the worst attacks against security forces that India has seen in a decade. The CRPF was moving 2,547 personnel in 28 vehicles from Jammu to South Kashmir when a Scorpio laden with at least 300 kg of explosives rammed into the convoy. The suicide bomber was Adil Ahmed, an alleged Jaish-e-Mohammed operative. JEM has claimed responsibility for the terror strike. Prime Minister Modi has said the perpetrators will have to pay a heavy price and the forces have been given a free hand. The Foreign Secretary has met foreign envoys from at least 25 nations. He's also met the Chinese ambassador and he has apprised them of the terror attack and Pakistan's complicity. Two big questions. Will India's diplomatic offensive work? And can we come up with a long-term policy to prevent such attacks in future? Let's take this discussion forward with our guests. We are joined by former Chief of Army Staff General V.P. Malik, Sharad Sabharwal, former Indian Ambassador to Pakistan, Ajay Sani, founding member of Institute for Conflict Management and South Asia Terrorism, Sasha Reiser-Kositsky, Global Strategic Analyst at the Eurasia Group, and Inar Tanjan, Political and Economic Affairs Commentator, will be joining us from Beijing. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the show. And General Malik, I'd like to begin with you. This is said to be the worst terror attack that Jammu and Kashmir has seen in a decade, since 2001, in fact. As an army chief who led us during the Kargil war, what is the big picture that you see at this point?
Look, it is a very tragic, very serious incident that has taken place indeed. And it's the first of its kind. I mean, we've had even Fedayeen attacks earlier, but the manner in which this particular attack took place, that is quite different. And it just goes to show how well planned it was, and apparently the new tactics which are being adopted by the terrorist groups. Obviously, I think now when we talk about it, first we have to carry out detailed investigation as to how it happened, who were involved, why were they involved, how the explosive was collected, how the vehicle was prepared, and how the Fedayeen was prepared. All that will have to be gone into, and along with that, I guess we will have to also ensure that now more robust security measures in those areas, particularly, all those are taken.
Right.
And we will also have to review our tactics against all these things. Now, there are certain aspects of internal dimension, what we call the counter-terrorism ops, both the civil side as well as the military side. But then there is also the external dimension, how we handle the situation across our borders and also in the international community.
And that is the question I'd like to take to Sharad Sabharwal, who's been our ambassador in Pakistan. Mr. Sabharwal, today the government said that the MFN status stands withdrawn. We'll begin a campaign of diplomatic isolation of Pakistan. What really is there in the diplomatic toolkit? What can we do?
Look, I will be candid. I think withdrawal of MFN status is largely a symbolic measure. Pakistan's annual exports to us are about $300 to $400 million out of their total exports of $25 billion, less than 2%. Now, theoretically, if our restrictions, end the entire spectrum of their exports, it will hurt individually the exporters, but not much hurt to the Pakistani state. So, as I said, it's largely a symbolic measure. We had given it in '96. Pakistan didn't give it to us, so we have withdrawn it. That's fine. Now,
Absolutely.
the strategy of isolation, we said that after Udi also, it's not that the international community doesn't know what Pakistan is, what it is doing. After all, Pakistan has been hauled up by the Financial Action Task Force. It's on their grey list. They have given it a list of things to do, failing which it would be put on the blacklist. It's just that countries, knowing that too well, work according to their own interests. Let me take an example. At the moment, the Americans are using Pakistan as an intermediary to work out a deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan to exit from there. So I presume that they'll be more interested in seeing Pakistan's behavior on that front than their behavior vis-a-vis India. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. This is something which needs to be done. People need to be informed about this attack and how it originated. I have no doubts that it originated in Pakistan. But we should be aware of the limitations of this approach. Now,
That's a big point.
Prime Minister has said that there will be a tough response. Now, to my knowledge, we have a range of options available at the tactical level, and I'm sure our security forces will pick on one of those options at a time and place of their choosing. But the problem with these tactical options is that their impact is temporary until Pakistan's internal dynamics kick in again to do something adventurous. So that's where we are.
That's right. So we need some time. We need a long-term policy also. We'll come to that in our second segment. But I think, Mr. Sabharwal, you made that important point that the world right now needs Pakistan as an intermediary to talk to the Taliban. And probably that's why our diplomatic campaign may have a limited response. But let me get in Mr. Sahni at this point. Mr. Sahni, you have been tracking the Jaish-e-Mohammed since its launch in 2001. Today, would you say that the Jaish-e-Mohammed is stronger than ever? What does this attack say about the JEM?
Nothing whatsoever. There is only one terrorist formation in this region, and that is the inter-services intelligence. It decides who is to be put forward and projected. It decides who is to be pushed back. The Jaish-e-Mohammed had been completely marginalized. First, after the attacks on Musharraf in, I think, 2000 December, and thereafter again over the last 2 to 3 years. And there were very, very limited operations by them in Jammu and Kashmir. They have been enabled, they have been empowered, they have been pushed forward by the ISI to now take a central role in Jammu and Kashmir. These are not individual, these actions do not reflect the capacities of these groups. They reflect the capacities of the state that is backing these groups. The problem is not the Jaish-e-Mohammed, the problem is Pakistan. And unless we understand that, we are going to keep running after the tail of the tiger, and we are not going to be able to, and this is true not only of India. You see, the entire thing in Afghanistan, America has been taking fatalities, they've been doing everything. You talk to anyone from Afghanistan, they will tell you the problem is Pakistan, it's not Afghanistan. The problem is safe havens there. The problem is resources and enabling factors in Pakistan that allow the Taliban to be so effective and to escape consequences of their actions. So we should stop by constantly running after these little groups. Yes.
Absolutely. Stop going after the low-hanging fruit, because the problem lies in Pakistan and its support to terror groups, which we've repeatedly seen over the last 2 decades. That is not new, and we've not been able to go to the root of the problem for some reason. Mr. Sahni, that's an important point. I'd like to get in Sasha at this point. Sasha, I would like to ask you about the global picture. 30 countries have come out in India's support. What do you think will be India's response to this by your assessment?
Thank you very much for having me on, and I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers of countries condemning this attack go up into the 190s. That's that's neither here nor there, because as previous commentators have already stated, the problem lies in Islamabad and nowhere else. And changing Islamabad's behavior is very, very difficult. I would assess that the Prime Minister in this instance will support some sort of limited military retaliation to make him, to bolster his popularity ahead of the election and make it look like he's doing something. But, you know, blowing up a house or a terrorist training camp or something somewhere is a nice signaling mechanism and looks nice politically, but doesn't actually do much of anything to get to the root of the problem, which is a much more difficult problem to solve.
All right, that's an important point, that there will be a limited reaction, probably a limited military response from India, but will that be enough? General Malik, coming to you, we saw a surgical strike after the Uri attack as well. India called it a big success. We took political ownership of that as well. What is the best response moving forward? Because clearly, as Mr. Sharad Sabharwal also pointed out and Ajay Sani also pointed out, we are not able to somehow address the root of the problem. And the root of the problem lies in the Pakistani state and its support to terror groups.
I think the root of the problem doesn't lie in Pakistani state. I think it lies more in Pakistan Army, which also controls the ISI. So unless you are able to handle Pakistan Army properly, you will probably not be able to succeed. So what we are now, probably we should be looking at it, is all the diplomatic measures, economic measures, as well as the military measures, which is not just a short strike, surgical strike that we had last time, maybe something bigger, but all that has to go on together. It cannot be in isolation of just a small strike across the border or line of control and then you come away. So all these activities will have to be, including the water sharing and things of this nature, which can have a long-term impact on Pakistan and its army in particular. You know, we have to focus more on Pakistan Army and the ISI, and I quite agree that we should not be worried too much about a small outfit like Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc. Although it will send a signal, but if you are looking at long-term solution, then you have to look at more at the army, Pakistan Army.
Okay, and Mr. Sharad Sabharwal, to get you in at this point, we have a number of diplomatic options. Even after Uri, we met all the foreign envoys. Even today, the foreign secretary met about 25 envoys from other countries, including the Chinese ambassador. How do we make sure that this actually works? You are saying that Pakistan right now is important for talks with the Taliban. How do we turn the screws on the Pakistani army?
You know, as I said earlier, we must take all these steps. We must brief the international community about the threat, terror threat to us from Pakistan and what they have been doing here. But we cannot wish away the realities of how international relations work. As I said, it has certain limitations. It's not that Pakistan is not under pressure. You know, they are before Financial Action Task Force, as I said earlier. The Americans have been saying, President Trump himself tweeted more than once that they are harboring these groups and so on. But then the Americans are now working with Pakistan to do a deal with the Taliban. So that's how international relations work. Well, the point I was making was, while doing this, we should be aware of the limitation that countries will act according to their own interest. Now, within that limitation, we'll see what kind of solidarity. We got a lot of solidarity in
Mr. Sabharwal, if I can interrupt.
Translate to something on the ground? That is the question. Yes, please.
If I can interrupt, we have a visitor from Saudi Arabia in a few days, Mohammed bin Salman. Do you think that visit could be used to our advantage?
Yeah, certainly. I'm sure that, you know, we would be discussing this matter with him, brief him of our findings, how this attack was mounted and what has been going on. But again, he is going to Islamabad also during the same visit, and, you know, there are some important items on the agenda. There is also some talk of a closer collaboration with Pakistan participating more actively in this anti-terror sort of coalition under the Saudi leadership. where General Raheel Sharif is also in that setup now. So again, we'll have to see to what extent they can lean on Pakistan to make them change their behavior.
Absolutely. I'd like to get in Mr. Sahni at this point. Mr. Sahni, we have seen the China angle as well. There was a statement from China condemning this attack. But do you think that China can be India's ally in this war against terror that we really see emanating from Pakistan?
I don't see any evidence of this happening in the foreseeable future. China has made it abundantly clear that it is interested in India only as a market, but is quite happy to see a weak and fractious India. In this sense, they have supported Pakistan, given Pakistan a carte blanche to do whatever it pleases to destabilize India, whether it is in Jammu and Kashmir or earlier in other parts of the country. And China will continue to use this policy because they do not want to see a strong India. They do want to see India as a potential or a actualized market, but their interests don't go beyond that. They are certainly not going to lean on Pakistan as far as terrorism is concerned, except where that terrorism in some sense affects their own interests. Their interests do not coincide with India's interests.
And very...
I would have little or no expectation from them.
All right, and you know, the other thing I'd like to ask you, Mr. Sahni, is the fact that how do we act against a Jaish-e-Mohammed? We've seen these attacks before, but this was a massive terror strike that took place. In the days to come, how should our own internal security be geared up?
Look,
and the larger message here, Mr. Sahni, you've been tracking terror attacks. What's the larger message?
Yeah.
What's the larger message from this terror attack?
The larger message is that Pakistan has decided to very significantly escalate. Pakistan is at the moment in a very triumphal mood because they see imminent victory in Afghanistan. They feel they can redeploy forces and resources from Afghanistan and redeploy tactics and strategies from Afghanistan to devastate Jammu and Kashmir. And we will see more and more of this. What can be done about this? Nothing. For the simple reason that we are not preparing. Strategies are based on capacities. Capacities have to be built over the years and decades. We have neglected both our defense forces and our internal security apparatus. Just go and look at the budgets. There is a contraction in real terms of budgets from year to year, both for defense and for internal security. There was a parliamentary standing committee meeting report on defense last year, which said that 68% of the equipment we have is in the vintage category. And that India did not have the ammunition to sustain a 10-day battle with Pakistan. This is a standing committee on defense headed by Major General Khanduri, who was a BJP MP, who is a BJP MP. And the only impact this report had was that General Khanduri was removed from his position as chairman. So we are trying to continue to project a false image of capacity and strength, whereas we have done everything to erode the capacity and the strength of our security forces. So we don't have strategic options because we have not built strategic options.
We don't have strategic options. We have not built them. That's an important point. And General Malik, coming to you, what do you believe that we need to do right now? Because we've seen terror strikes like this earlier. There was outrage when there was the Parliament attack, the Pathankot attack, the 26/11 attack, the Uri attack as well. But how do we stop this? How can we come about and bring about a long-term policy to stop this?
Look, as I said right in the beginning, there are internal dimensions and external dimensions. Internal dimensions, we can already we can get into that straight away, and I hope that people will start acting on various steps, like the governor making better use of the UHQ, better coordination, making sure that radicalization doesn't take place anymore. For that, civil society is required to. So there are a large number of activities. The politicians have been spoiling the whole thing. We have not taken any action against Hurriyat at all. In fact, we are giving them all kinds of facilities. So those are the internal dimension measures which can be taken more effectively than we have done so far. Now, as far as the external dimension is concerned, I am fully with the people who have spoken earlier that these things have to be done by us. You cannot depend on diplomatic issues, diplomatic aspects alone. And whether it is Saudi Arabia or it is USA or anybody else or China, I mean, I don't think they are going to take you very far. I mean, they can give you support in the United Nations here and there, but otherwise you have to take
and what
these
can be
actions.
the best?
And for
what can be the
which, as
best
Ajay
immediate
said, just
option?
1 second. Can I say that? Let me complete it. That as Ajay said, you have to build your capacity to deter and to dissuade the people, the adversary across. At the moment, why these incidents are taking place? Because there is no deterrence. We haven't built the deterrence. The first job is to deter people so they don't dare to attack you again. We have eroded that for such a long time. So we have to build all those things if you want to go for a bigger action, military action, that you have to build the capacity for that.
You have to build the capacity for that. General Malik, thank you very much for being with us. Let me go back to Sasha at this point. Sasha, thanks for waiting patiently. We've been talking about a number of diplomatic options. And I think this is something that Mr. Sabharwal also touched upon. The Financial Action Task Force meeting. The FATF deals with money laundering and terror financing. There's going to be a meeting of that very, very soon. Pakistan is under review. Do you think this terror attack will hamper Pakistan's reputation globally? And probably there could be trouble at the FATF as well?
Sure, it will tarnish their reputation globally, but this is, their reputation is hardly blemishless as long as they may continue to have a level of Chinese support on the international stage. Relatively little can happen. There was a discussion earlier about India building better capacities to deter these kinds of attacks. I haven't seen a case where a country has successfully deterred suicide attackers. It's effectively impossible to do, even with the finest military on earth. It would be very, very difficult, nigh impossible, to deter this kind of aggression, barring a willingness to take pretty significant military action that would spark a broader war, at which point you would need to invest in missile defense capabilities more so than anything else, because that escalation could lead to a nuclear conclusion. I would argue that the most difficult to get there, but I would argue that the most effective way to deter this kind of behavior would be a much more concerted campaign of international sanctions. Admittedly, very difficult to see these being put in place, but make it much more difficult for, say, the sons and daughters of Pakistani generals to study in the US and the UK. Make it much more difficult for them to import high-end whiskeys and the like. Make Pakistan look more like North Korea, and maybe you'll start to get somewhere. Very, very hard for that kind of sanction regimes to be put in place. It probably won't be, and China could provide a massive backdoor and loophole through anything like I was just describing. But that would be one of the means towards putting meaningful pressure that could potentially change behaviors.
Turn the economic screws, that's what you're mentioning. But Sasha, do you also believe that China, the Chinese foreign minister, has written to the Indian foreign minister? Do you think this terror attack will make Pakistan change its view on Maulana Masood Azhar? In the 1267 Counter-Terrorism Committee, we've been trying time and again. There have been at least 4 attempts to sanction Maulana Masood Azhar, but those attempts have been blocked by China. Do you think China will change their attitude? And will this 1267 committee and sanctioning of Maulana Masood Azhar make any difference to the war against terror at all?
So even if the Chinese finally get embarrassed enough to stop blocking the move, I think you're quite right that it doesn't actually matter that much in the greater scheme of things. If the ISI and other groups in Pakistan want to lash out at India, they'll find some other front person and some other organization and channel their efforts through that instead.
Right. It may not make a big difference at all. Coming to Ambassador Sharad Sabharwal at this point, Ambassador Sabharwal, going forward, do you also believe that economic pressure, if we use our tools, our diplomatic tools to build economic pressure on Pakistan, that would be an effective way forward, considering that the Pakistani economy is in turmoil currently? Probably that is the most effective option with us right now.
You see, as I said earlier, there is not much leverage that we have ourselves in that area. I spoke to you about trade. That's largely symbolic measure. Even if the entire exports basket from Pakistan is scrapped, it's not going to hurt the state very badly. Now, really hurting Pakistan needs the cooperation of the international community. They need a bailout package from the IMF, about $8 billion. They got some money from their friends from Saudi Arabia, UAE, I think the Chinese have also parked some money in State Bank of Pakistan, but they are still looking for a bailout package. Now, their influential countries have to get together and say, you will not get a bailout package until you give up the instrumentality of terror. And I don't expect that's going to happen. As I told you, countries work according to their own interests. The Chinese have now a very, very deep involvement with the CPEC in Pakistan. It's a strategic project. It's not an economic project. And the Americans are working through them to get out of Afghanistan. So in that kind of situation, can we realistically expect that there would be international sanctions or, that it would influence the decisions of IMF significantly? I don't think so. So there are a number of limitations that have been talked of by all the speakers here. And it's not a good thing to say on a day like this when there is a lot of anger on the street, in the country, justifiable anger. But I think two things I would say. One, that as General Malik also said, the internal dimension we have to take care of somehow. Pakistanis exploit the internal dimension, the problems that we have in the valley. That's number one. And number two, certainly, our forces would take some action to inflict punishment for this very dastardly act. And I have no doubt that they would do it at a time and place of their choosing. But in general, I believe that for the foreseeable future, we have to manage this very, very difficult relationship by combining dialogue with discreetly exercised deterrence, with some degree of consistency in that. That seems to be the only way forward.
All right. We also have Inar Tangent, political commentator, joining us from Beijing. Inar, we have been talking about China on this broadcast over the last 10 to 15 minutes, and there is a feeling that China is probably not going to come around and back India's move on sanctioning Maulana Masood Azhar at the 1267 committee. Do you think that there is going to be any change in China's stand on Pakistan-sponsored terror in the days to come, Inar?
I do believe so. I mean, the initial statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry was quite mild, just declaring that they're against all acts of terrorism. In the coming days, though, I think Beijing, given that the attack has been attributed and claimed by this terrorist group, that they're going to have to change it. Beijing has to think long-term in terms of the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and this is going to be upmost in their mind. There's also the exchange, the visit to India by Xi, and I think they want to keep that on track. So I think they'll be doing what is necessary to show that they're against this kind of outrageous behavior. Right.
Inar, thanks for joining us. I'd like to go back to Mr. Sahni at this point. Mr. Sahni, we have been talking about a diplomatic offensive. Today, Arun Jaitley, after coming out of the CCS, the Cabinet Committee on Security, said that the MEA has been empowered to ensure complete diplomatic isolation of Pakistan. But do you think both our diplomatic measures and military capabilities and building up strategic might and capabilities on that front have to go hand in hand?
Look, everything has to go hand in hand, but nothing is going anywhere. The first thing you have to decide is what is going to be your long-term strategy. We just heard that, you can't deter suicide bombings. Of course you can. You can't deter suicide bombings at the point of delivery. But you can get to the, not to the last man in the line, but to the state apparatus and the entire infrastructure that is enabling suicide bombings. For that, you need to have long-term development of capacities. All we do is talk about these things after a big incident. And then we wait it out till everyone has sort of got over this anger in the streets and all this nonsense. And then we go back to business as usual. And business as usual is disruptive, polarizing politics. It's corruption. It's incompetence, it is bureaucratic delays. It is a complete neglect of the national security imperatives of this country. Not over 4 years or 5 years, but over decades. How can you expect to have the capacity to deter an adversary when you do everything to erode your own capacities, both of defense and internal security and of offense?
All right, Mrs. Sahni, I'll have to leave it there for the moment. Our thoughts and prayers, and I'm sure thoughts and prayers of every Indian today are with the families of those who've lost their lives in that terrible, terrible tragedy. Almost 40 CRPF personnel were killed. I guess this panel is unanimous with their belief that we need long-term strategic depth. We need long-term strategic planning as well as we have a diplomatic offensive against Pakistan. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on this broadcast.